Aldo, why don't you just kind of give us a lay of the land and talk about what it means, and if there's people that are possibly exempt and stuff like that, if there's some
Sure.
exemptions.
So first, I'm just going to start by reading the prohibition. The act is called the Prohibition on the Purchase of Residential Property by Non-Canadians Act. There's the act, and there's regulations made under the act. Um, the prohibition actually states that it is prohibited for a non-Canadian to purchase directly or indirectly any residential property. So that's the prohibition. It's very short, but that turns into pages and pages of legislation and regulations with exceptions and rules and so on. So that's the main exception. The Act goes on to define what is a non-Canadian or who is a non-Canadian. And a non-Canadian is considered any individual who is neither a Canadian citizen, an Indian under the Indian Act, or a permanent resident of Canada. So those are kind of the three classes that would be exempted. They could still buy if you're a Canadian citizen, Indian, permanent resident. That's all good. There's other exceptions to the rule. Temporary residents are also permitted to purchase property as long as they fall within two categories and meet the conditions. The two categories are students on a student visa, but they have to have lived in Canada for a minimum of 244 days in each of the 5 previous years. They must have filed tax returns for 5 years. They can purchase a property where the price does not exceed $500,000, and they must not have purchased a residential dwelling prior to that. The second, for temporary residents, the second exception is for people on a work visa. They're also permitted to buy real estate as long as they have worked in Canada for a minimum of 3 years in the last 4, have filed tax returns for those years, and have not purchased more than one residential property. Others who are exempted would be a protected person, so someone who has been granted refugee protection by the government would be allowed to purchase. And then a bigger category would be spouses or common law partners of any of those that I just talked about. So spouses or common law partners of Canadian citizens, persons registered as an Indian, permanent resident, or a temporary resident that meets the 2 criteria I mentioned earlier, or spouse of a refugee who has protection status, they would also qualify to purchase.